FWdeKlerk, the last white president in South Africa and a key figure in its transition to a multiracial democracy, has died. He was 85. As president, Mr de Klerk freed Nelson Mandela from prison and repealed the country's discriminatory laws, paving the way for the country's first democratic elections in 1994. Paul Adams reports.
Today we have closed the book on apartheid, and that chapter is finally closed.
The force of history would have ended white supremacy in South Africa eventually. But without FWdeKlerk, the transformation to non-racial democracy might have been more painful. He saw that his country had to change, and he delivered. Mr de Klerk knew very well what lay behind the chaos and violence in black townships, provoked by rigid racial segregation. For years, he helped entrench apartheid as a minister in South Africa's white minority governments. Then he became president in 1989, replacing P.W. Botha, the last apartheid dinosaur. And President de Klerk's approach could not have been more different.
The prohibition of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party and a number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded.
Within a year, Nelson Mandela finally walked to freedom. FWdeKlerk had ordered his release and unbanned the African National Congress, acts he knew would number his own days in power. But talks to end white minority rule opened old wounds in black politics. There was appalling township violence between the ANC and its Zulu rivals, violence actively fomented by the white security apparatus. And white extremists were up in arms at the prospect of a black government. De Klerk sensed the threat and outmanoeuvred them by offering a whites-only referendum in 1992. He craved backing and he won it. Now change was unstoppable. The world acknowledged it. In 1993, Mr de Klerk was jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, along with the man who would replace him as president. Although Nelson Mandela was sometimes infuriated by FWdeKlerk, he called him a man of integrity. President Mandela's inauguration in 1994 was partly a tribute to Mr de Klerk's vision. The country's last white president remained loyal to his Afrikaner heritage. Some of his former colleagues complained he'd been opportunistic, merely seizing a moment. But seize it he did.
Never again on 1 inch of the soil of the Republic of South Africa will there ever be racial discrimination again.
And therefore, among white South Africans, FWdeKlerk will stand tall in history.
FWdeKlerk, who's died at the age of 85.
The former president of South Africa, FWdeKlerk, the last white person to lead the country, has died at the age of 85. He was a key figure in the country's transition to democracy and in the release of Nelson Mandela from prison in 1990. As Andrew Harding reports, Mr de Klerk recorded a last message to the South African people with instructions to broadcast it after his death.
We did not only admit the wrongness of apartheid.
FWdeKlerk was terminally ill when he recorded this farewell message, still wrestling with his place in South Africa's tortured history.
I, without qualification, apologize for the pain and the hurt and the indignity and the damage that apartheid has done.
In the late 1980s, South Africa stood on the brink of chaos. The security forces of a racist white government were battling against the black majority. No one expected much to change when de Klerk took over as president. After all, his government ran a nation where black people were treated by law as subordinate, inferior.
The prohibition of the African National Congress.
But within months, de Klerk announced a shocking U-turn.
A number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded.
The ANC, the outlawed Liberation Party of Nelson Mandela, was unbanned, and soon after that, Mandela himself was released from prison after 27 years. Soon the two men, once bitter enemies, were sharing the Nobel Peace Prize as South Africa inched towards democracy.
What nobody can take away from him is his foresight. He seized the moment, he showed the courage, and he was the figure that eventually saw the end of apartheid and Nelson Mandela elected as president in those heady days of the new rainbow democracy.
But the transition was not peaceful. Thousands of black South Africans died during political violence that was, it turned out, deliberately stirred up by white security forces. Still, de Klerk and Mandela kept negotiating, nudging their nation forward. Not that they were ever close.
So help me God.
And then in 1994, history was made as Mandela was sworn in as democratic South Africa's first president. De Klerk retreated backstage. The question that has always stalked FWdeKlerk is a simple one. Was he a good man who did all he could to destroy an evil system? Or was he an opportunist, someone who never properly confronted his own role in the horrors of racial apartheid? Many today here are choosing to focus on his undeniable achievements.
He had the courage to step away from the path that his party that he led had embarked upon from 1948, and we will remember him for that.
De Klerk will always be a divisive figure, but history will record that he helped to bring freedom to South Africa.
The former South African president, FWdeKlerk, who has died at the age of 85.